Lucas woke up early that morning. The sky was clear, as if even it had prepared itself for the big day. The sun was rising slowly, bathing the room in a soft, golden light that seemed to confirm everything his heart already knew. He was exactly where he was meant to be. He looked at himself in the mirror and smiled. The suit hanging neatly on the hanger, the shoes carefully polished, the tie his mom had picked out with so much love, everything was ready. But what shone the brightest in that moment was something invisible, the faith he had in love. Lucas was the kind of man who believed in promises. He'd grown up hearing that love is patient, that it believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. And now, about to live what he called the beginning of forever, his heart beat faster, not from fear, but from gratitude. His bride, Helena, had been his partner for 3 years. She had the kind of smile that could stop time, and he swore the world slowed down just to watch her when she smiled. They had weathered storms together, faced challenges, made plans, so many plans. The house with a porch, the dog they hadn't picked yet, the kids whose names changed every week. At the church, everything was perfect. White flowers lined the pews, soft music filled the air, and guests were settling in with anticipation. Some friends smiled through teary eyes. Others took pictures. Lucas's mother held a tissue in her fingers, already bracing for tears. Standing at the altar, Lucas felt his heart thudding in his chest. It wasn't nerves. It was something deeper. It was the peace that comes when you know you're right where God wants you to be. But time kept moving. 5 minutes. 10. 15. People began exchanging glances. The musician played the same tune for the 3rd time. One of the groomsmen leaned in to whisper something. Lucas's mother began to frown. And still, he stood there smiling. Because he believed. Because he trusted. But the church doors remained shut. 20 minutes. 30. One of the ceremony coordinators quietly approached and whispered something in Lucas's ear that drained the color from his face. He tried to hide it, still clinging to hope. He looked down the aisle as if waiting for a miracle. But silence answered in the bride's place. The ceremony was called off. And in that moment, with every eye on him, with the flowers still fresh, with the music still playing, Lucas felt the ground disappear beneath him. What he didn't know was that right then, God was beginning to save him from something he wasn't yet able to see. If this story moved your heart, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Here, every story is a seed of hope, and maybe, just maybe, one is being planted in you today. Lucas stayed at the altar for a few more minutes. His face pale, his eyes lost. He was still trying to process what was happening. People had started getting up from their seats, some walked over to him, others quietly slipped out, honoring a pain that hadn't even been named yet. The wedding planners said they had tried calling Helena multiple times, but she wasn't answering. The car that was supposed to take her to the church was still parked in front of the house where she'd stayed the night before. But she simply never came out. Lucas didn't know whether he felt angry, ashamed, or just heartbroken. Everything felt unreal. He had dreamed about this day for so long, imagined every detail, practiced his vows in the mirror. And now, no explanation. Not even a word. On the way back home, the silence was deafening. No one knew what to say. His father tried to keep a strong face, his mother quietly cried. Lucas just stared out the car window, as if hoping he'd wake up any second from a nightmare. When he got home, he took off his suit slowly, almost ceremonially. He sat on the edge of his bed and stayed there, staring at the floor, feeling like his chest was carrying the weight of a stone. He couldn't even cry. The pain was dry, silent, like a wound too fresh to bleed. In the days that followed, he avoided talking to anyone. His phone wouldn't stop ringing, messages kept piling up, but he ignored them all. He didn't want advice, and he definitely didn't want excuses. He needed silence. He needed to understand how something that had felt so right could suddenly turn into such a hollow, aching void. Some friends stopped by, trying to lift his spirits. Others sent Bible verses, words of comfort, even memes to try and get a smile. But Lucas didn't want to smile. He wanted answers. And no one, absolutely no one, could give him the one he needed most. Why? That was the question echoing inside him like a thunderclap on repeat. Why did she do this? Why leave him at the altar? Why, after everything they had been through? Each memory brought a sting. Each unanswered question, a lump in his throat. Lucas wasn't just grieving the end of a relationship, he was grieving how it ended. The lack of closure. The public humiliation. The shattering of a dream he believed was part of God's plan. What Lucas didn't know yet is that sometimes, God's greatest answer is silence. And when he allows a door to close in such a painful way, it's often to keep something even worse from entering. Helena's absence at that altar wasn't just abandonment. It was protection. The days passed slowly. As if time itself had grown heavier, thicker. For Lucas, just waking up was hard. Not because he was tired, but because waking up meant remembering. And remembering meant reliving everything all over again, like he was stuck in an endless loop. He avoided going out. The streets felt too crowded. People, too loud. The questions, too invasive. It felt like every glance carried judgment, pity, or that one phrase he hated most, everything happens for a reason. Lucas didn't want explanations. He wanted to understand what he had done wrong. He started questioning himself, replaying every conversation, every gesture, every moment with Helena. Was it something he said? Something he didn't? Did he love too much? Or not enough? The nights were even worse. In the silence of his room, where everything still reminded him of her, his mind wouldn't stop. The honeymoon plans, the photos still sitting in frames, the scent she left behind on his pillow. He thought about throwing everything away, but couldn't bring himself to do it. He packed it all in boxes, trying to hide the pain, without realizing it stayed alive, even locked away. Then came the anger. A quiet, cold kind of anger. Anger for having trusted, for having believed. Anger at her, at people, at himself. And deep down, though he wouldn't say it out loud, anger at God. Lucas had always had faith. He grew up in a Christian home, learned to pray before bed, went to church on Sundays. But now, for the first time, he felt like his prayers just hit the ceiling and fell back down. Where was God when he stood at that altar, waiting for a bride who never came? Little by little, he began to pull away. He stopped going to church. He stopped reading the Bible. Praying? Only to complain. And even then, most of the time, all he could do was cry. Not a cry of release, this was the kind of crying that came from the soul, like everything inside him had collapsed at once. People around him tried to help, but Lucas stayed quiet. Loneliness became his companion. And deep down, he felt like he deserved it. Like it was a punishment. like God had forgotten him. After all, why would he allow so much pain right when everything seemed to be falling into place? But what Lucas didn't know is that the desert isn't a place of punishment. It's a place of transformation. And there, in the depths of his pain, a new story was beginning to take shape. Still invisible, still silent, but just as real as the love he once thought he'd lost. With time, as the pain faded from a storm into a heavy breeze, Lucas started remembering things he'd once chosen to forget. It was like, in the silence of long days and empty nights, a few pieces started slowly falling into place. Helena had always been captivating. She had a presence that turned heads, a charming way of speaking and laughing. But she also had absences. And now, with clearer eyes, Lucas could finally see them. He remembered the times she avoided serious conversations, the promises made and broken with a casual smile. The well-crafted excuses, the constant lateness, the little lies he had chosen not to question, just to keep the peace. There were also moments when she seemed distant, like her heart was somewhere else, chasing something different. When he talked about the future, she would smile, but never engage in the details. She always let him take the lead, like she was just watching a movie, never part of the story, never part of the script. Once, Lucas found a strange message on her phone, but she got so defensive, so angry, that he ended up apologizing. He believed her explanation, let it go. He didn't want to lose what they had, so he ignored the signs, chose to close his eyes so he could keep dreaming. But now, forced awake, he saw everything differently. Lucas realized it wasn't just about being left at the altar. It was a reflection of a one-sided relationship, where he gave too much and received too little. Where love was fed from only one side, while the other hid behind empty promises. He couldn't understand why he hadn't seen it before. Maybe it was fear of being alone. Maybe it was the desperate hope that love, if strong enough, could fix anything. But the truth is, real love doesn't have to fix everything. It builds. And Helena never wanted to build. She wanted something easier, lighter, less committed. And when she realized the weight of the decision waiting at that altar, she ran. That's when it finally hit him. For the first time, Lucas considered the possibility that maybe, just maybe, being left at the altar wasn't the worst thing that had ever happened to him. Maybe it was the best. Maybe God had, in fact, closed a door. And it was in that thought, still messy, still full of doubt, that something new began to grow inside him. A flicker of hope, barely noticeable, but enough to spark the will to live again. He started getting out of bed a little earlier. Reached out to a few friends. And one day, without really knowing why, he walked back into that little neighborhood church. Just one step. But it was the beginning. The beginning of healing. The beginning of a homecoming. The beginning of a new faith. If this story is speaking to you, hit that subscribe button. Here, every story is a reminder that God never stops writing when your heart is willing to start again. Lucas stepped into the church like someone returning home after being gone for a long time. There was no celebration, no warm hugs, no welcome music. But there was something more important, peace. He sat quietly in the back pews. He didn't want to be seen, much less approached. He just wanted to be there, still, in a place where he could breathe without heaviness, where his soul could rest, even if just for a few minutes. The service had already started. The pastor was speaking about seasons of loss and rebuilding, about how God sometimes allows things to fall apart, not to destroy us, but to teach us how to build on stronger foundations. With every word, Lucas felt his chest tighten. It was like someone was narrating his own story, with details he'd never shared with anyone. When the service ended, he didn't speak to a soul. He got up, whispered a silent thank you, and left. But that night, for the first time in a long time, he slept peacefully. In the days that followed, he kept coming back. He still sat in the back, still quiet, still just listening, letting the words slowly settle into the cracks of his heart. He started reading the Bible again, this time more slowly, not just with his mind, but with a wounded heart searching for healing. His prayers, at first, were short. Sometimes just tears. But God understands tears. He always has. Lucas realized the wound still hurt, but it wasn't bleeding the way it used to. Helena's memory was still there, but it was no longer a knife, it was a scar, one that was beginning to tell a new story. And surprisingly, he started noticing things in himself that had been asleep. He discovered he was a good listener. That he had a kind of sensitivity that reached people. A friend invited him to join a small group, and there, he heard other stories, of loss, of healing, of faith rediscovered. Slowly, he started to speak too. And when he spoke, people were moved. Someone said to him, "When you speak, it feels like God is using your pain to heal ours." That phrase stuck with him. Lucas realized then that his pain wasn't just his. That maybe, just maybe, God was using it to shape something new. Something he never would have found if he hadn't walked through that valley. He was still in process. He still felt. Still remembered. Still had hard days. But something had changed in a big way. He now knew he wasn't alone. His heart, once broken, was being shaped again. And this time, by the hands of someone who truly knows what they're doing. As time went on, something extraordinary began to blossom inside Lucas. He was no longer the same man who once stood before an empty altar. The pain hadn't destroyed him. On the contrary, it had made him deeper, more sensitive, more aware of life and the people around him. One evening, after a support group meeting at church, one of the leaders came up to him and said, "Lucas, have you ever thought about sharing your story with others? It hurt to hear your pain, but it healed something in me to hear what God did afterward. There are a lot of people who need that." Lucas smiled, a little shyly. He had never thought of his story as a mission. To him, it was just his story. But something in that phrase kept echoing inside him. He started to write. At first, just scattered thoughts and reflections. Then short devotionals, testimonies. He was invited to share briefly at a church event about healing and overcoming. He was nervous, sweaty hands, shaky voice. But at the end, an older woman came up to him in tears and said, "Today, God used your story to help me believe again." And that's when it clicked. Lucas understood. He understood that the pain hadn't been pointless. He understood that the scar, now healed, carried a quiet strength that could reach hearts still bleeding in silence. God had given new meaning to what he had gone through. And that changed everything. Lucas started getting invited to speak at other churches, youth groups, couples retreats. He told his story without bitterness, without resentment, but with a clear, compassionate heart. He wasn't a man marked by abandonment. He was someone who had been saved from the worst, to live for something better. Over time, he began to hear other stories too. People who had been left, betrayed, forgotten. People with questions he knew well. And in those face-to-face moments, Lucas offered what he had learned most through his journey: presence. He listened without judgment. spoke with love, showed people that God never gives up on anyone. His pain became a bridge, and he, a vessel. His faith had come alive. It wasn't the faith he'd learned sitting in church pews as a child. It was a faith forged in fire. A mature faith, built not on human promises, but on divine ones. The kind that never fails, even when everything around us falls apart. Lucas began living with a new purpose. And that purpose was simple: to help people see God even in the middle of their pain. And that's how he discovered that what once seemed like the end was actually the exact moment God began writing the most beautiful chapter of his story. Lucas never loved the same way again. Not because he was afraid, but because he had learned. Love, now, wasn't rushed or wrapped in hurried promises. It was presence. It was building something slowly. It was paying attention. And above all, it was prayer. After so many conversations, so many nights spent comforting broken hearts, Lucas was no longer looking for someone to fill a void. His heart wasn't in pieces anymore. It had been restored. And a healed heart doesn't leap at the first sign of affection. It waits for direction. It was during one of those simple gatherings, a Bible study group, that he met Mariana. She came in quietly, sat off to the side, didn't say much. But there was something about her that caught his attention. It wasn't just her beauty, though that was undeniable. It was her peace. A calm gaze, a way of listening without interrupting, a kind of maturity that spoke louder than words. Over time, they grew closer. At first, just in passing conversations. Then, deeper ones. They discovered shared values, mutual passions, similar scars. She had also been hurt by love. She, too, knew what abandonment tasted like. But just like Lucas, she had been restored. Their friendship grew, watered by gentleness and respect. And from that friendship, something new began to bloom. A quiet kind of love. One that didn't rush to prove itself, because it knew that true love reveals itself over time, in small gestures, in consistency. Lucas prayed. He asked for direction. And for the first time, he felt peace at the thought of writing a new story. They talked to their pastors, sought counsel, and chose to walk together, not to erase the past, but to honor everything God had done to bring them to this point. His relationship with Mariana was unlike anything he had known before. It felt as though God had handcrafted, in the finest detail, a meeting between two hearts that had learned how to love after pain. They didn't talk about fairy tale endings. They talked about real beginnings. And when, sometime later, Lucas looked at Mariana with tears in his eyes and told her he wanted to walk beside her for the rest of his life, there was no grand celebration. No spotlights. No extravagant flowers. But there was something far greater. There was the certainty that now, at last, they were exactly where they were meant to be. And it had all started back there, at that empty altar, in a moment of pain that, now, made perfect sense. Years had passed since that unforgettable day, the day Lucas was left at the altar, in front of a full church and an empty heart. Now, looking back, he no longer felt pain. He felt gratitude. Life had moved on, but at a new rhythm. Slower. More peaceful. With purpose. Beside Mariana. And with a clear calling in his heart, to be a voice for those who suffer in silence, a comfort to those who feel forgotten by God. Because he knew, firsthand, that God never forgets. It was on an ordinary afternoon, during a quiet conversation with a close friend, that Lucas heard something that made his heart stop for a moment. The news came gently, carefully, like someone handing over a heavy truth with as much grace as possible. Helena, his ex-fiancée, had been investigated for emotional fraud. Not just with him, but with other people too. She had used relationships for personal gain, got involved with hidden motives, manipulated feelings. And the marriage with Lucas? It would have been just another step in a plan that, he would later understand, could have pulled him into a trap he might never have escaped. That night, Lucas sat in silence for a long time. He thought about it all. The blind love. The misplaced trust. The warning signs he ignored. But he also thought about God. And with a heart that was both tight and relieved, he whispered a prayer. "Thank you, Lord. What I once thought was a tragedy was actually your hand protecting me." The following week, he was invited to speak at a youth conference. He stepped onto the stage with a steady voice and a peaceful gaze. And in front of a room full of people, he said something no one expected to hear from someone who had been left at the altar. "I wasn't rejected that day. I was protected. The altar where I was left behind wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of a brand new life. God didn't embarrass me. He saved me." The room fell silent. Some were crying. Others prayed quietly, thanking God for their own scars. Lucas smiled. Now, he understood it all. Not with bitterness. Not with anger. But with the peace of someone who trusted, fell, was lifted back up, and found his way again, stronger than ever. The door that closed in front of him wasn't punishment. It was protection. Because when God closes a door, it's because He knows exactly what's on the other side. If this story spoke to your heart, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share it with someone special. Here, every story is a reminder that God is still in control, even when we don't understand, even when it hurts. There is always purpose hidden in His plans.